outside? Should I run and hide? How do I take my company worldwide? Do you love the law? Did you watch Hee-Haw? What's the weirdest thing that you ever saw? What's it like in court? Favorite sport? Can you help with my book report? Is my hair too long? Am I right or wrong? And do you mind if I sing along to anything? Ask Alan anything in the world.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of Ask Alan the podcast. I'm Alan Crone, the CEO of the Crone Law Firm, and we've got a very interesting show today. I'm very excited about it. We've got Greg Ziskind and Marc Diaz, who are the principals of a real estate title company and closing firm called CloseTrak that's doing real well. And gentlemen, thank you for jumping on the call.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Alan. We could jump right in with the name CloseTrak. So I've always kind of been a fan of technology, maybe not a great user, but I've always been amazed at what it can do. So I had originally got in the closing business back in 1993, and I got out in the late 90s when everybody was talking about the information superhighway. Mm-hmm. And as that was coming along, I thought it was going to be big. So I thought I needed to kind of further my education, learn about the internet a little more. So I got out of the closing business and went back to school for a couple of years and got a degree in e-commerce, and decided I would try to take the transaction online and create this transaction management portal. And that's where the name CloseTrak came from. It was a very rudimentary website at the time, but sounded good on paper. Nobody really, I was solving a need or a problem that really didn't exist. People weren't ready to migrate online yet. So I eventually pivoted I kept the name and pivoted back into the traditional closing space of, printing documents and signing with ink.
Greg, how about you? How did you get to CloseTrak and this type of transaction work?
Yeah, so I started out at a traditional law firm when I finished law school in 1999. And our mutual friend, Bill Walk, was a partner there. And that's how I met Marc. It was we were back in our younger days. We had a lot of fun playing golf together, and I had decided that environment just wasn't a good fit for me. And we were doing a lot of litigation, but had a little bit of exposure to the transactional side. And as I got to know Marc and heard more about what he was doing, it was just seemed like an exciting opportunity. When I left, I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do next. And Marc and I have laughed about this over the years from time to time. I just started kind of hanging out at the office, and he had a place to work, and I started doing some closings and learning the ropes. And that's been nearly 20 years now that we've been together.
Well, Marc, I want to pick up on something you said that I think is fascinating. You were an early adopter of some of this technology, but expound a little bit on how resistance in the industry or your customers impacted the application of technology to closing real estate.
Well, initially, I think some people who were going to be impacted by the closing, migrating it online, were fearful that it could eliminate their position or, the value they might bring to the transaction. And we've recently seen, so that never really happened, partly because the technology wasn't ready, partly because people weren't ready to move on. So as we know, recently with COVID, people kind of got forced into a lot of online situations. So we dealt that, and that accelerated both the development of the technology as well as some of the laws that were needed to implement it or to make it legal. And one of those was online notaries. And what I've kind of come to find out, and Greg can chime in on this, people, even though that online avenue is available for the closing, I don't think it provides nearly the experience that an in-person closing does. And once those rules were relaxed and people would come back into the office again, and we still had that online option, nobody really wanted that online option hardly. It was rare that we needed somebody, absent some exigent circumstances, they were out of the town or out of the country or whatever. So there are certain aspects of the transaction that we can compress and migrate online. And at the inception of the process, it's very helpful, like getting signatures to a contract. You want to hurry up and bind the agreement, you can email it out, they electronically sign it. But when it comes down to the closing, that kind of capstone event for the transaction, people seem like they want to come in, and we want them to come in and kind of summarize and explain everything at that point.
When you do closings online, I'm assuming you're doing them via Zoom?
Well, we've done them a variety of ways. We had some emergency rules passed during COVID where we could do a Zoom closing. So we would FedEx or deliver the documents to them. We'd have a Zoom call. They would sign them in wet ink where they were. We'd notarize them when they got back. Now we've got different platforms available where we can do a remote online notary where they don't have to sign, but they can just click. So we use a little bit of both now.
Greg, where do you think technology in your industry is going to take the industry?
It's a great question. I wish I knew the answer. The adoption has been slow, slower than I think anybody would have predicted, say 10, 20 years ago. I think that at that time, we were all under the, would have said, we won't be sitting at a table. There won't be, wet ink closings anymore. And yet here we are, and still the vast majority of transactions are closed, where somebody is signing in the traditional way. As we move forward, as our children grow up and we become older, I would like to tell you, I think that it'll become massively adopted. But I'm really not sure, Alan. I think, as we were talking offline, I mentioned there was an individual, we had a transaction that closed this week where, unbeknownst to anybody, he just was out of the country and said, well, I didn't realize, I thought I could do it all online. And we were able to get it done through a RON transaction, but they're cumbersome. And I think they make people feel a little bit uncomfortable. This gentleman was probably in his 60s. And so generationally, you would think this is a person who wants to come into the office, wants to see it, touch it, feel it, sign it. But he didn't. And so I in some ways, I think, well, it's a generational thing. Younger people are more accustomed to the technology. They want it. They expect to use their phone to sign everything. But that's not always the case. And as I've said for years, for almost everybody, a home is the single largest purchase that you'll ever make in your lifetime. And coming in and sitting around a table and signing documents and having somebody like myself or Marc explain things, that may never go away.
Do you think there's a correlation between the sophistication level? In other words, if I'm a couple and I'm buying my first house in my 20s, I'm more inclined to want to sit with the lawyer and understand everything, as opposed to it's my third house and I'm in my 40s or 50s. I just want to get the deal done. I'm not as worried about knowing what I'm signing because I've been through the process. Is there a correlation there, you think?
I think there is, but there's always the exception. The gentleman I mentioned, and on the other extreme, I'm recalling last week, I also had a couple. The wife, this had been her home since she was 4 years old, and she was, I would say, well into her 70s. Oh. And there was no using even email. We were taking things to them, and so they could see them in advance and dropping them off at their house. And so there was no technology deployed in the transaction, very, very, very little. So it really does run the gamut. But yeah, generationally, I think younger people are more inclined to want to sign electronically and do everything over their phones. And older folks, myself included, would be more inclined to come in and sign at a table.
Yeah, like you say, there's something about knowing that there's a paper file somewhere that I think gives some comfort to some people. But it's interesting because on my side of the law, I do a lot of litigation. I really thought that the Zoom hearing would be prevalent and preferable, but those are starting to kind of go away. I think there's something about coming together in a courtroom or a closing room. I don't want to say it's more formal, but it just seems more real if you're there in person.
Well, I think this is a harbinger of a lingering effect of the financial crisis, is that there's still in many people's view a distrust. What am I doing here? What am I signing? And I can say when I first started doing this, it was not uncommon at all for somebody to sit down at the table and go, that's not the monthly payment. That's not the interest rate. And since we had some new laws take effect, I would say somewhere 2012, 2014, we call them the TRID rules. The entire process now is engineered for disclosure. You're going to get the settlement statement. We call it the closing disclosure 3 days in advance of the closing. You're going to get to see it. You're going to know what your interest rate and monthly payment are. The same thing with at the time you apply for the loan. There's rules in place that say disclosures have to be made so you know what fees you're paying. So really the entire process was re-engineered, and almost every loan that's originated today in the residential origination space is the originator wants it to be eligible for sale to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, our government sponsored entities. So everybody is signing the same, form of promissory note, form of deed of trust. It's all uniform. So they're not, slipping one in on you, and that you're only going to come to find the surprise when you make your first monthly payment or somewhere down the road. So to that extent, because I think that it's really more engineered for disclosure, I think it does lend itself more to a remote online notary, an electronic signing, but still, people are leery, and it'll take time for that leeriness to go away.
Mark, what advice would you give, homeowners that are engaging in a transaction like this, whether they're first-time home buyers or first-time home sellers, or they've done it a bunch? In this new environment, what tips would you give them on how best to interact with a company like yours?
Well, one thing, we've started to do here lately is it seems like everything's kind of coming full circle, whether it's, everybody going to vinyl for their records. We're trying to get back to more face-to-face, in-person, talking on the phone instead of, just emailing, texting, those kinds of things. Because one of the kind of the dark side of digitizing the transaction or moving things online is it's opened up the transaction to a lot of fraud all over the world. We're constantly under attack. Email, real estate agents are, their email accounts are constantly under attack by hackers trying to figure out when a transaction is happening. And what the hackers will try to do is we'll try to figure out when a transaction is and insert some bogus wiring instructions into the transaction. So cyber fraud is a huge issue right now. We like to get an in-person introduction, or not an in-person introduction, but a kind of a personal connection to the client early on in the process, so that if they get an email asking for money, they need to call us and verify it. So it's kind of buyer beware, seller beware right now in the transaction, especially for first-time home buyers. They don't know, kind of the sequence of events. Sometimes they wouldn't know that it might be odd, 2 weeks before closing to get an email asking them to wire all their money immediately. And, these fraudsters are pretty savvy about that because there's so much money at stake. I think they're really deploying a lot of resources. And even with the RON, the remote online notary, I've already heard of fraudulent transactions there already. Which is even more just bold, because in a RON transaction, you've got two-way audio visual. So you're on a, just like we're doing now, you're almost like on a Zoom call with the fraudster, and they're signing and they've got bogus credentials. In this case, I heard they had a bogus passport that was verified through some kind of agency, third-party agency. And they were able to, get away with that fraud.
Well, Greg, how about you? What advice would you give folks that would be interacting with you, with your company?
I could probably go on for longer than the podcast lasts on this question, Alan. Banks have something called Know Your Customer, KYC. No, I didn't say that right. The Know Your Customer rules, but the know who you're dealing with when you're dealing with somebody at a real estate closing firm. You use firms in Tennessee. You don't have to be a lawyer to do a real estate closing. So, I mean, there's no, as long as you can write a title insurance policy, you're an agent for one of the title companies, and they'll give lots of people agencies, then you're qualified. Now you may have to have a license from the state of Tennessee, but you don't have to be a lawyer. I think when Marc and I started in this, it was, yeah, we wanted to utilize technology, and yeah, we wanted to deploy it in a way that would make things more efficient. And so you could call that kind of, new school. But I would say that we're also very much old school in the way we operate on a day-to-day basis. I don't know. I have a pile of paper on my desk behind me here, which is me looking at title searches. And I look at a lot of title searches every day. It's what I do. And it's not because I really enjoy looking at title searches. The novelty is worn off. But it's because, when you've looked at as many as we have, you're going to see things that other people aren't. And for example, I have a client right now who bought something in Nashville and they're refinancing it. And it's an investment. Lo and behold, there's a covenant in the title work that says you can't rent your property out. It's prohibited. And we're seeing a lot of that now because, in most communities, they don't want an Airbnb, they don't want overnight transient tenants in their communities. So you're seeing a lot of homeowners associations enact changes to their covenants and bylaws to prohibit short-term leasing or to prohibit it altogether. We really do try to take a blend, I guess, if you will, the use of the technology, but still staying true to what we think, the client really wants and deserves, and not make it a completely commoditized operation where it's just a conveyor belt of everybody here has a role to play. And as much as there's parts of it that I enjoy more than others, I think all of the various aspects and roles that we play in the transaction are vital and necessary.
Well, I really like what both of you had to say about the personal touch. And I think that's probably good advice, no matter what you're doing, no matter what kind of business you're conducting. At some point, you really need to get on the phone and talk to the person that you're dealing with, because that's what these scammers rely on. Most of the scammers, I think, rely on everybody's busy, everybody's trying to get things done, and they're hoping that you don't pay attention to the fact that their email address is 87 characters long. And just hit send or hit okay and do that. At some point, you've really got to pick up the phone and confirm things, particularly when you're being asked to transfer money.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that keeps us up at night, and it's the thing that we harp on. We've got some really experienced, good people that have been with us for, in some cases, many more than 10 years. We had it happen this week. We keep telling stories, but I got a call yesterday. We have an office in West Memphis, Arkansas, in Crittenden County. And the lead person in our office over there called me and said, we had this closing. I was familiar with the closing, and we weren't going to be able to close the transaction because there was a recent tax sale in the chain of title. And the title company just says, no, they want you to go get an order quieting title that involves hiring, somebody to go pursue something in Chancery Court. So it wasn't going to close. When the contract closing date was, Nevertheless, a $50,000 wire showed up. The person who sent the wire was emailing, was calling. I didn't mean to send $50,000. Send it back, send it back. And, you know, we've seen this scenario play out a number of times. And of course, our team over there said, you know, their tentacles were raised, and they called me and I said, no, absolutely not. Don't send the money back. We got the bank on the phone. The bank said, if that's the case, whoever sent the wire needs to call their bank and have it returned, initiate that process through their bank. But clearly, from my perspective, I didn't really go further with it. The money never hit the account. It was a bogus wire, or maybe it was an ACH. So it was never really available. And if we had done what the person was asking, we'd have put $50,000 in their pocket. So we've got experienced people, we've got good controls in place to handle those situations. And, you know, when something like that happens, you know, we make everybody aware, hey, this happened. Everybody needs to be aware of it so that they can learn from it the next time.
Well, and you know, that's a great story. And one of the parts of that story that I think is interesting is, you know, you're looking through the title and you find a tax sale. And I think, you know, the layperson who's going through a sale, something like that, you know, they really don't realize the importance of making sure that title is really, really tight. And when you automate it too much, those are the kinds of things that you theoretically can miss, particularly if you're not an experienced lawyer, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it goes to this, what I call the kind of the commoditization of our industry. You know, if title acquired by tax sale is very perilous, and the title companies put on seminars every year about it. They don't like to insure that risk. They'll tell you that there's constitutional protections in place. If you didn't get notice of that sale, actual notice, not notice by publication, then that has due process implications. And we've seen those lawsuits get filed from time to time in federal court. And there's really no scenario for the title company that's positive there. It's a complete failure of title if the taxpayer never got notice. But everybody wants a deal. So you're seeing efforts to kind of, you know, as the tax sale process has moved more and more online, and you can see the deal, and oh, that's a great street, or I know that area, or, you know, this could be a great investment. It could be, but it's not one that in most instances a title company is going to insure that risk. You're going to have to go further and get a quiet title, or do some other things, maybe get a deed from the taxpayer. But nobody likes to hear that. And you know, because at that point, you know, we may be standing in the way of somebody, you know, making an investment, making a decision that they really think is in their interest. And we don't like to do that either. So we're going to try, if we can, to help them. But, you know, our hands are somewhat tied in that instance.
Yeah, Mark, it's not like you're buying somebody's grandmother's piano, you know, and I think it frustrates buyers particularly buyers sometimes when these things happen. But if they don't get it resolved before the closing, a lot of times they're just out of luck, right?
Yeah, actually, I've got a situation now, and it's usually before it's a commercial situation, and for most people, they don't distinguish between title search and title policy. And even within that, there's quite a bit of difference there. So for example, on this one transaction I'm thinking of that I'm getting ready to close, commercial transaction, they didn't have an agent, but they thought they were getting a good deal on this property, and they may be. And we didn't get involved until about a week before closing. And according to the terms of the contract, the time for raising any objections to the title had already passed. And he said, well, I've got a title search and a title commitment. And they assume that means everything's good. So I looked at the title commitment, and yeah, they did a title search. But on the title commitment, which is the commitment for the title policy, they had noted a lot of problems with the title that they weren't willing to insure. He didn't know any better. He just thought, hey, I got a title policy. And I said, yeah, well, you've got a title policy, but it doesn't protect you against all these risks that they were able to identify in the title search, which were defects in the title, but his time for, raising that objection to the seller had already passed. So while now he can't have the seller fix them, he's going to have to pay, us to fix them before closing so that he's got a good title to the property.
Yeah.
And I've seen that a lot with tax sales too. People are wanting to buy a tax sale and they said, oh, I've got a title search on it. Well, that's just, telling you about the problems that are there. It doesn't really fix the problems that are there. And then, with regards to title work or deeds and things we find in the title search, there's so many things that are just unfixable, but that's what title insurance for. Some of those risks that are out there are so small that the title insurance company is willing to protect you against those because the risks are so small. It could be something like an old mortgage from Boatman's Bank. Boatman's Bank hadn't been around forever, so
Right.
they're willing to take the risk that that's been paid off, but a release was never filed of record. So title insurance really provides the lubricant to allow a lot of deals to get done.
Well, very good. Well, I'm looking at my clock. I think we're about out of time. But I want to thank you guys for hopping on the call and
Sure.
sharing your insights. Last question before we go. Big picture, next 10 years, where do you see your industry, your profession being?
I'll take a little stab at it, Greg. I think banks are going to try to continue to move into the space and accelerate the speed of which these transactions occur. And right now, as Greg said, we spend a lot of time looking at title searches, trying to identify problems and fix them. Eventually, title insurance will move to kind of a different insurance model where they won't scrutinize the title history so much. They'll just have an actuary put a number on it and say, we know that X number of titles are bad and we're willing to insure them for this premium, and we're not going to go worry about fixing all those problems.
I'll answer the question this way, Alan. I hope that we see a lot of instances of fraud, and it takes a lot of forms. But you can walk down right now. I could go with you to the Shelby County Registrar's office, and I could say, I don't own this property. Alan does here standing next to me, and I'm going to deed it to myself. And as long as it meets their recording requirements, then the Shelby County Register, by law, it's not by choice, it's by law, will record that deed. And we see that it comes up regularly. If you go down there and you ask them for a form, they'll give you one. You see a lot of handwritten deeds nowadays, which always raise a lot of eyebrows in our office. I hope that there will be some changes in the law that make that more difficult. I hope that with respect to intestate succession, where somebody dies without a will, that Arkansas has some laws that are a little bit more progressive in this regard. But right now, if I own a piece of property and I die without a will, it just descends to my heirs. So that could be my spouse, my kids. And as you can imagine, many times, some of those heirs may have departed or can't be found. We need a better way for property to descend in that scenario, because it's a home. It's got value, and so I'd like to see some changes made in that regard, so that wealth can be passed on to another generation and doesn't just end up, as cheating to the state or, being sold at a tax sale.
That's a good point. It's a good point. I see that a lot in my practice, a lot of litigation over, heirs in an intestate situation. There's so many ways to button that up, that if you own a home and you don't have a will, or it's not in a trust or in some vehicle that allows it to pass easily and quickly, you owe it to your heirs to do that. And it's not really that expensive if you do it proactively, and it may save a family ending fight on the back end. Well, you guys, I appreciate it. You being with us so much. I'll tell you, y'all, one of the best in the business, and it's an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you for your time, Alan.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching this episode of Ask Alan. If you enjoyed it, please share it on social media, email it to your friends, get the word out about these real estate issues that we've talked about. As Greg and Mark said, this is your most important investment, the biggest investment you're personally ever going to make, unless you're Elon Musk and you go around buying publicly held social media platforms. But I bet maybe his house is worth more than $43 million. That may be true too.
I'm going to call you when he asks me to close his house on Mars.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But I digress. So thank you all very much. I'm going to go get some justice, and Mark and Greg are going to go help people achieve the American dream with home ownership.